7 lakh villages are there in India. If 7 lakh villages are there, if they can contribute 10 people each for the salt satyagraha, how much people will be there? And you tire the government. The government should lose the confidence in themselves. That's the way to proceed. And once they lose the confidence, then your objectives will be much easier. So that is how he was planning to work on. And from there, you can see the Purna Swaraj things moving up further. And next, Manir sir will be taking up the Quit India movement, how it was stirred up further level. I hope I will stop here. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, just yeah. In a very descriptive manner, Dr. Ravi has brought out what happened after non-cooperation movement and the way Indian freedom movement was slowly and gradually was being shaped up, especially under the leadership of Gandhi. Now, if I have to describe the why Gandhi chose to attack salt, salt, and took it as a symbol that should be attacked as far as carrying on the movement and as far as taking on the British government was concerned, and its relevance also in present times. Then I would read I would take something from his writings. So in his own writings, which he wrote, one of the articles, he considered it that salt or the kind of policy the British government had adopted. It was four kinds of curse. This is the way he is putting it, and the four curses he is saying that why it is so: deprives people of a valuable, easy village industry. That's one. Second, he is saying that wanton distribution of wanton distribution of property that nature produces in abundance. The third thing he is bringing out, that destruction would mean more national expenditure. Now, what the British government would do? One thing is that it would prescribe the limits. Beyond that, the salt would not be produced. Number one. Number two, taxation. And number three, if at all the production was more than a level, then it would be destroyed. So that's what the third thing he is making. The destruction would mean more national expenditure. And finally, 1,000% tax imposed on what he is saying is starving people. Now, if we are trying to see these four things, these are equally, applicable, equally valuable if you are trying to look at any kind of democracy or the way democracy should treat their people. That taxes, they should not be so much, improportionate and so much, they should not look repressive. I mean, if I can say it in this way, they should not taxes, they should not look repressive, number one. Number two, the things that has been provided by the nature in abundance, that should be used and that should be utilized in a manner. Then they should be valuable and they should be useful for the people. So this way you can understand the way he is putting the the relevance of salt satyagraha in that context. So we can apply, we can understand in those terms even today. So with these words, maybe I'll open the floor for questions. If you have any questions, then you can throw, and Dr. Ravi would respond to that.
Maybe after the period of British rule in India, the next period of repression, we can count it as the emergency rule, which happened in the 1970s, if you can call it. Do you think that there was any sufficient learnings and implementations from Gandhian philosophy and the way of politics and strategy during that time? Just I wanted to know about that.
I think the emergency itself was a kind of people's response to the deviation of position of Indian National Congress. From a democratic setup, if you see the till 1947 or 48, how the Indian National Congress was working, how the structure was formed, all these things were more democratic. And from after that, you can see the positions are changing, and the emergence of Indira Gandhi in the leadership has changed the proportions completely. And that kind of challenge, the challenge against the democracy in the party, or that reflected in the government also, and that was challenged by the people. So you can see the content of freedom movement is continuing or contributing to challenge, to have a courage to challenge the leadership.
Thank you, sir, for your enlightening throwing of light on civil disobedience movement. But just to continue from where the last question stopped, do you think that now taking up the farmers' issues in today India can be comparable to the Dandi March in those times?
Dandi March was not just it was not a spontaneous movement. I said in the beginning, it was not a spontaneous movement. It was not just started just like that. And farmers' issue is I won't say that it is a spontaneous thing. It is continuing for quite a long time. But are the movements are prepared to handle it in the way Dandi March was proceeded? I have doubts. The preparation, I said, I was more emphasizing on the preparation of Dandi March. So that type of preparation, whether we can see in the in this field right now, it is more like a bargaining, like which political party should get the maximum mileage out of it. That kind of approach. Whether the proper problems of the main problems of farmer is addressed or not. Any of the political parties bringing such things? I can't say that. So there is no comparison in that sense. Yes.
In fact, Salt Satyagraha, Dandi March, that was a real milestone in Gandhian mass movement, in fact. So he also walks, and taking salt as a symbol, in fact. So with salt he could connect with the masses, but it also affected everybody's life, everyday's life. And his walk from his Dandi march from Dandi to Ahmedabad, if I am correct. So it was a long march, and it continues for several days, if I am correct. And that also was a kind of mobilization, and it also evoked a lot of response. And everything was carefully planned, in fact, even his communication. So it was a very strategic choice, the choice of place and the choice of march. Everything, of course, it was quite a planned, rather experiment. And with regard to emergency, it was quite interesting, in fact, how two Gandhians responded to emergency. Anand, no? Yeah. Vinoba Bhave, who was also a prominent Gandhian, so initially was in support of emergency. He calls it as Anushasana Parva, an age of disciplining, because there was the earlier impression that, there is no discipline in the country, so there are only mass movements and chaos, and people don't come on time. So after emergency, there was some change. So he also calls it as Anushasana Parva, but at the end of 2 years, if I am correct, he also changes his position, Vinoba Bhave. But another reaction comes from another Gandhian, that was Jayaprakash Narayan, who also, of course, travels from Marxism to socialism to Gandhism. Of course, it was a long journey. So it was Jayaprakash Narayan who organizes major mass movement against emergency. And finally, he was instrumental in getting many non-Congress parties together, and that was first non-Congress government that was formed after, in independent India in 1977. So how two Gandhians responded differently to emergencies is an interesting part. Want to say something?
Now then, maybe we can break for tea now, then reassemble in another 15 minutes. But one thing possibly I could add that, there are two things one can always see when we are trying to understand something from Gandhi, the way he handled the national movement those days. And taking up the examples that you are trying to add, either, how emergency or how the farmer suicides and all this. So there are two aspects to it. One is that, your right to protest, right? Your right to protest and you get the grievances addressed. That's one. Second thing is that how you are looking at the government. Government in the sense that, somewhere the government, the way it is trying to address to your grievances. So these are, two things from which one can understand all these things, one can analyze all this, apart from the various other factors that we have or that we can add. Having said that, maybe I would request Professor Vadesha to say something regarding the communication part and all. He was okay, fine. Yeah, so some part on communication part and during his also and all that. Yeah.
It's about the preparation of Dandi March, how Gandhi conceived the idea and how he reached out to people. That's something which, and how he prepared the volunteers for the program. And also bringing a lot of, this time, press was more participated, and you can see television was operated in the program. And American journalists were there. American journalists, not television. American journalists were there, and which actually giving a reach to further areas, not only in India, it is towards the other places. And it's not just one place, happening in, Gandhi is leading a march to one place to another and bringing all people together. Gandhi imagined in such a way like from Sabarmati to Ahmedabad to Dandi is around 240 kilometers. He's leading the march, and simultaneously other places, all other places in India, leaders of those places will do the same thing. Actually, the government has to act in all places at the same time. So this is something very innovative method of action, which was not so far used in any struggle at that time. And it is 240 kilometers he walked, and actually that kilometer, that matters a lot, because the place, once he start moving along with his volunteers, he prepared for the march. It is only 70, 80 people. That was his program. But the moment he started walking, he was gathering people along with him. And the time when he reached Dandi, it was a huge crowd. And this was not, it was a government force or the force of British police could not handle such kind of force at that time. And it was non-violent and never crossing the border, like never getting violent and retaliating to the forces. They are accepting the atrocities and going to the jail. That was the process was going on. So it replicated in all places together and actually gave a very, very tiring time for the government. This is actually the importance of this march is about the organizing capacity of the Congress and also Gandhi. How they managed to bring people. And it is, I said, like, this is a galvanizing process of the nation building. How the entire country got into one code. And salt become a component of that, and how the people come together to fight against the British domination. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ravi. As you would see, the national movement was not, or rather, the way India gained its independence not simply was a product of national movement, but there were so many other things one could look at. So a lot of moves and counter moves from the part of the government, from the part of the movement leaders. So we would also see there were a lot of strategies and negotiations. They were also involved as far as national movement was concerned. So that was very interesting in terms of we could see that how during the World War II that the Indian leaders they negotiated that in terms of their support for the British government, how India would get its independence post World War II. I mean, of course, the Britishers, they were not known for keeping the promises, so that we all know, but how things developed and unfolded and all those things. Then next milestone that we see in the terms of Quit India movement in 1942. So with all this, we have another eminent speaker to throw light on all those things, Dr. Manish Tarongbom. He's currently assistant professor with us at the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, and previously he was associate fellow at the Center for International Relations, Observer Research Foundation, New Delhi, and also a guest faculty at the Ansel Institute of Technology, Gurgaon. He has a PhD from US Studies Center, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He has conducted field research in the United States of America, including at the Lyndon Baines Johnson Presidential Library at Austin, Texas. He has also worked on the US role in Afghanistan as part of the NATO assessment project between ORF and the Integrated Defense Staff. He has several publications to his credit, including chapters in books, articles, and book reviews in refereed journals and commentaries and opinions in several magazines, newspapers, and websites. So with this short introduction, now I hand over to Dr. Manish for his presentation.
For such a generous introduction. First of all, I thank again Dr. Verdesh Iragange and the Department of Gandhian and Peace Studies for giving me this opportunity to speak on a very important topic of relevance. First of all, I sincerely believe that I neither do have the wisdom or the experience to speak and analyze something like Gandhian philosophy and politics. Nevertheless, history has been a subject very close to my heart, which I studied during my undergraduation, and I continue to study world history, and specifically I went to studying American history at large. I think why Gandhi is important, even if we, I'm someone who believes that history should be understood in the historical context and not necessarily try to bring historical elements and put them in a different context and try to make, either negate or accept them. But nevertheless, Gandhi as a subject and non-violence as a subject has been since I was, I think I did not think about that when I was a kid. But when I reflect back now, I think it has been a very important moralistic dilemma of my life, in the sense that I grew up in one of the most insurgency-prone areas of India, Manipur, where a violent insurgency has been raging against the Indian government for the last 30, 40 years. And it has not seen any solution. There is no sight of solution. And things are going rather downhill. Then, if I look at my training years as a PhD scholar, I have tried to understood the nation-building process in America as such. And in that, I see, again, a lot of references and counter-references in terms of what does it really go into building a nation. America's nation-building rather has not been a rosy picture also, right? So if I look at even the characters like Martin Luther King and also the existence of someone like Malcolm X within that same framework, who believe not in integrating with the whites, but who believe that the whites should be different, the African Americans should be different. So I think whether we commission or omit Gandhi, I think the importance of Gandhi is that in our lives, whatever we study, it has a ubiquitous presence. It's everywhere, whether you commit or omit it. So I think that makes it really important in terms of understanding what this particular, the whole idea of like generations who grew up during Gandhi's period and generations like us who try to understand Gandhi 60, 70 decades after Gandhi leave. For instance, permit me this space before I can talk about Quit India, I think because it is important, because when I think about my own place, Manipur became a part of India in 1949. And the existence of Gandhi, the presence of Gandhi in the mindscape of Indians. The Gandhian movement stopped on the boundaries of Assam. And it is very important to understand what Gandhi means, to regions of India which were not a part of the Gandhian movement as such. And how do we bring the relevance of, even though you are being taught Gandhi in school curricula, how do you really bring the presence and the essence of Gandhi into the lives of these people, right? I think that's that's something that we can take up and discuss later on, because I think the idea of any country, whether it is America, whether it is India, the idea of India is emerging. Nation building doesn't have a deadline. It's an emerging process, it goes on. And as we go along in the process of this 60 plus years of India's existence as an independent country, we are undergoing a lot of challenges in terms of how what is this India? What is the idea of India? What do you mean by being an Indian? How do you really, how do you define yourself as an Indian? I think as we talk about Gandhi and the nation building process in India, these are important questions before us that will either mar or make the process of building an inclusive India. And I think that's an important point to ponder upon. Having said that, let me come back to my prescribed topic, which is Quit India. And a very important phase, I think, and an uncertain phase also, right? Because unlike before, whether it was a Dandi March or there's this different movements that happens after Gandhi comes back to India, here we have a movement where Gandhi was imprisoned for the entire period. He was being imprisoned in the Aga Khan Palace in Pune. So Gandhi was not there. None of the leaders were there. On the early hours of August 9, after the resolution of Quit India movement was passed at the Gauliya Teng, the then Gauliya Teng of the then Bombay, which is now called the August Country Maidan in Mumbai. In the early hour of 9th August, almost all the leaders were swooped away, taken to different detention centers to make sure that the movement did not go the way it was planned. So I think this is a question that I will try to answer at the end. And I would put it here, that the major questions of Quit India movement were whether the movement was spontaneous, really. Was it really spontaneous? The second question is, what about the violence factor of the movement? In the sense that it is a movement which really grade the zone between violence and non-violence. Because Gandhi and the leaders had left a very open mandate in terms of what to do with the Quit India movement. What do we do? How do we really understand this non-violence? If the clarion call was, karo ya maro, karenge ya marenge, do or die, how do we really die? Right? What do we really do? How do we really fight the British? So there was an open space left in terms of what is to be done. So I think it was a phase in which different parts of India, people rather reinterpreted the ideas of non-violence. Whether it was the picketing of police stations, whether it was, going in groups and removing railway tracks, whether it was burning down police stations, whether it was attacking post offices. In some cases, even in parts of Bihar and UP, certain Royal Air Force officers were, even lynched, killed, and paraded in the town. So how do we really make sense of this disparate nature of a movement, which nevertheless was a very important movement in terms of that leap forward, in terms of that anti-climax of the Indian movement, right? Indian national movement. So let me begin from the beginning, in the sense that I think the genesis of the Quit India movement should be really linked to the World War II situation, the coming of World War II, and the security scenario that was prevalent around the world, and what was Indian National Congress approach to World War II. What was going to be our stand, whether we are going to support in what conditions, in what terms, what is the nature of the support going to be. And I think it is also important to look at this phase, the differences that were erupting within the Congress itself. It was mentioned before, the growth of young leaders, Subhash Chandra Bose, Nehru. Nehru was a little bit closer to what Gandhi thought, but there were subtle differences in especially on the World War II situation. Bose had a different idea altogether. And we see specifically the differences erupting during the Tripuri session of 1939 over the presidency of the Congress and what it means to be the leader of the Congress, when I think Bose sort of misjudged the position inside the Congress in the sense that there were people who liked the new policies that young blood were like Bose were bringing to the fore, but they nevertheless they really did not mean that Bose could really supplant Gandhiji's leadership. So there were certain subtle differences within the movement itself, and I think it was important in terms of understanding how India responded to the World War II scenario, because as there were differences between the communist and the socialist bloc also, in the sense that the communists were more, even specifically after the Soviet Union came into the fray of, came fully into the war, the communists were more in favor of supporting the war because of their allegiance to the communist movement in Soviet Union. So the Subhash Chandra Bose had a very different viewpoint. He wanted to take advantage of the situation of the war and make sure that there was a mass struggle launched at that very point in time. Gandhi started by largely supporting the cause of the Allies by saying that fighting the fascists and anarchists is something that which we should support principally and emotionally. Then Nehru had a different point of view. Nehru did not really, was principally in for the, if he were to make a choice between the Allies and anarchists, definitely his choice would be the Allies. But what was his point? He was saying that we should not support the Allies, but also we should not take advantage of this situation to make it more difficult for the British. So subtle differences in how we were seeing our response to World War II. And I think it is very important in terms of how Quit India movement goal was built up. So one of the important things that we did, the leaders really disliked was the idea that without even consulting any of the leaders in India, India was declared as a belligerent country, as a part of the war movement, right? So as we have seen, that this became a major factor in terms of how, yes, we are not in favor of the policies that Hitler or Mussolini, they were developing. But it is ironic, it is an oxymoron to think that how was it possible for an enslaved nation like India to aid other countries in their fight for freedom. So if this was really a taste of democracy, a fight of democracy, of freedom against the kind of oppression that the Nazis were advocating, should not that taste of freedom and democracy start from India itself? That was kind of the demand that the Indian National Congress put. But as we saw, the Viceroy himself was not in favor of making any commitment towards the Indians. He rather tried to accentuate or rather tried to propagate the differences which were there already within the Indian community in terms of the emergence of the Muslim League, what were their approach towards the war in terms of, as I pointed out, socialists, communists, princely states. So while Indians were asking for freedom in, freedom for the support that they would give to the World War II situation, here the British were engaging in a different kind of policy altogether, rather a continuation of their divide and rule policy, right? So in one of the statements, I think it's interesting that Lilongwe, the Viceroy, says, "I am not too keen to start talking about a period after which the British rule will have ceased in India. I assume that day is very remote, and I feel the less we say about it, in all probability, the better." So this is the kind of approach that was there within the British government at that point of time. So it thus became very clear that the British government had no intention of loosening their hold on India during or after the war, and that it was willing, if necessary, to treat the Congress even as an enemy, right? So the Congress, it's very reflective in one of the terms that, one of the phrases that Gandhi also put forward in that terms, that the Congress was asking for bread and it got stoned from the British. So in all probability, the statements were rejected. The major questions that developed in terms within this period was also whether India was ripe for a mass struggle or not. Here again, Bose and Gandhi had differences. Gandhi till this time, Gandhi probably believed that there was more time to be given to the negotiation process as such before we start a mass struggle. Nothing but we were closely inching towards the larger struggle of saying that complete freedom or nothing at all, right? So in the Ramgarh session of 1940, we started making it more clear that nothing short of complete independence would be accepted by the people, and failing which there might be possibilities of a civil disobedience starting in India. But at this time, the government refused to budge and took up position that no constitutional advance could be made till the Congress came to an agreement with the Muslim communalists. So there was a stark difference in terms of how the British were trying to play up on the communalism factor and make the point that there were still differences within India. How can we trust one part of, basically the Indian National Congress of administering a post-war India? So Nehru puts in his article titled "The Parting of the Ways," the British rulers believe that in this world of force, of bombing aeroplanes, tanks, and armed men, how weak we are, why trouble about us? But perhaps even in this world of armed conflict, there is such a thing as the spirit of men and the spirit of the nation, which is neither ignorable nor weak, and which may not be ignored save at peril. So this is the kind of viewpoint that is slowly developing within the Indian National Congress. So there is a developing resistance in terms of how we were viewing World War II scenario and how the British were viewing World War II scenario, and